This is a comprehensive analysis of the 2026 U.S. Iran conflict, authored by Fan Duton Nan. This exploration views the crisis through the triple lenses of game theory, energy geopolitics, and war finance. As we now know, on May 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a massive, coordinated wave of airstrikes against Iran. Among the devastating reports following the initial sorties was the confirmed death of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. The impact was instantaneous and global. The Strait of Hormuz, the world's most vital energy artery through which 20% of global crude oil flows daily, ground to a near-complete standstill. Global markets buckled under the weight of uncertainty. Oil, precious metals, and major stock indices plummeted and spiked in a chaotic frenzy. Thousands of international flights were grounded within hours. The Gulf states, once perceived as invulnerable hubs of global finance, suddenly found themselves squarely in the crosshairs of Iranian missile batteries. In this suffocating atmosphere of dread, many have begun to wonder, is this the prologue to World War III? To answer that, we must look beyond the smoke of the battlefield. We must traverse the layers of multinational history, analyze the shifting regional power structures, and decode the strategic logic of each player to understand why this conflict could either spiral into a global conflagration or be tenuously contained. If you are ready, let's dive into the core contents. Part 1. The historical context, a chain of escalation without end. The 2026 U.S. Iran war was no black swan event. It was the explosive climax of an escalatory spiral that began in earnest in October 2023, following the outbreak of the Gaza war. In the years that followed, Israel methodically dismantled Iran's axis of resistance across the Middle East, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and various pro-Iranian militias in Iraq and Syria. By late 2024, Israel and Iran had already moved from shadow boxing to direct, overt missile exchanges. The situation reached a fever pitch in June 2025 when the U.S. and Israel executed Operation Midnight Hammer, a high-stakes mission specifically designed to cripple Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Simultaneously, Iran faced internal collapse. A wave of fierce anti-government protests gripped the nation throughout late 2025 and early 2026, met with brutal state repression. By May 2026, the rhetoric turned explicitly political. Donald Trump publicly urged the Iranian people to reclaim their institutions. Shortly thereafter, he declared that regime change in Iran would be the best thing that could happen. When indirect nuclear negotiations in Geneva finally collapsed, the clock ran out. At 2:30 a.m. on May 28, the offensive began. This context is vital because it clarifies that the strike was not a simple act of preemption. It was the calculated endgame of a long-term strategy aimed at total regime change. The Shia-Sunni divide, why religion is the decisive variable. To predict how Iran reacts, one must understand the unique psyche of Shia Islam. Comprising roughly 10% to 15% of the global Muslim population, approximately 180 to 270 million people, the Shia community carries a distinct historical legacy centered on martyrdom as a communal glue. The Battle of Karbala in 680 AD, where Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, was slain while resisting the Umayyad Caliphate, is more than history. It is the spiritual DNA of the Shia world. Every year, millions commemorate Ashura through rituals of mourning and pilgrimage, honoring Hussein's choice to fight an overwhelming majority despite certain death. Applying game theory to this cultural framework, the prominent geopolitical theorist Professor Yang Xin, noted for his uncanny accuracy in predicting global shifts, posits a terrifying hypothesis. He argues that when a figure like Ali Khamenei is killed, it is not viewed by the Shia community as conventional war. It is perceived as a sacred war for vengeance. While Iranian state media initially denied Khamenei's death, they quickly pivoted to framing him as a martyr who chose to die alongside his people rather than flee to safety in Moscow. This wasn't accidental propaganda, it was the deliberate activation of a millennium-old cultural code. The logic of martyrdom versus the theory of deterrence ***. The logic here is stark. Killing a leader like Khamenei does not necessarily weaken Iran, it radicalizes it. In classical game theory, Players seek to maximize gains and minimize losses, specifically the loss of life. Entire Western doctrines of deterrence are built on this rational foundation. If you attack me, I will destroy you. Therefore, do not attack. However, when an opponent views death not as a cost, but as a reward, where martyrdom equals eternal heroism and heavenly glory, the entire equation is inverted. Deterrence loses its teeth when the adversary no longer fears the end. Threatening to kill them only grants them exactly what they crave. This is not mere theory. History provides chilling evidence. Beirut, 1983 * Hezbollah, backed by Iran, executed 2 suicide bombings against U.S. Marine and French paratrooper barracks, killing 241 American servicemen and 58 French soldiers. It was the deadliest day for the U.S. Marine Corps since Iwo Jima. The result? The U.S. withdrew all troops from Lebanon within 4 months. 2 men willing to die forced a superpower to retreat. The Iran-Iraq War, 1980 to 1988. This was the institutionalization of martyrdom. Hundreds of thousands of Basij volunteers, many just 12 to 16 years old from poor rural families, rushed to the front lines. They wore plastic, gold-colored keys to heaven around their necks and cleared Iraqi minefields with their own bodies to pave the way for tanks. More than 36,000 students were martyred in these human wave tactics. The 2020 assassination of Qasem Soleimani * the U.S. eliminated Iran's most powerful general, the architect of its regional proxy network. The outcome was not a weakened IRGC, but a direct ballistic missile retaliation against U.S. bases in Iraq and the elevation of Soleimani to a martyr status that unified a fractured Iranian public. These examples illustrate a core principle. A committed minority can exert massive asymmetric pressure on a majority with a lower level of commitment. Even if only 1% of the Shia world is willing to seek martyrdom, that represents millions of individuals, a security threat no defense system can fully neutralize. Part 2. Geography and Energy, the Real Chessboard. Imagine the global economy as a living organism. Its carotid artery is a stretch of water just 21 miles, 33 kilometers, wide at its narrowest point, with shipping lanes only 2 miles wide in each direction. This is the Strait of Hormuz. Every day, 20 million barrels of oil, 20% of global consumption, pass through this choke point. It supplies the energy for the giants of Asia, China, India, Japan, and South Korea. But it's not just oil. 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas, LNG, and a massive portion of Europe's jet fuel pass through here. Following the May 28 attack, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, declared the strait closed, warning that any vessel attempting passage would be set ablaze. But Iran doesn't need a massive naval fleet to execute a blockade. They only need to be selectively violent. A few well-placed drones or sea mines are enough to paralyze the region. In the shipping industry, the decision to sail doesn't belong to the captain, it belongs to the insurance companies. When war risk insurance is denied or becomes prohibitively expensive, global trade stops, regardless of whether the U.S. Navy is present. Within the first few days, 5 tankers were damaged, and giants like Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd suspended all transits. The economic shockwaves will travel far beyond energy. It will tighten financial conditions, skyrocket inflation, and push fragile economies into a deep recession within weeks. While alternative pipelines exist in Saudi Arabia and the UAE, they can only handle a fraction of the volume that flows through Hormuz. Why strike 9 countries at once? When news broke that Iran had targeted 9 different nations, the public reaction was one of shock. Has Iran gone mad? However, through the lens of game theory, this was a cold, calculated move. It was based on 2 hard truths. First, neutrality is a myth when you allow your soil to host the weapons of your enemy's adversary. The U.S. operates a network of at least 19 military facilities across the Middle East, housing up to 50,000 personnel. While the Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, nations, including Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, publicly declared neutrality, Tehran's logic is different. If there is a U.S. base on your land is a legitimate target. Second, attacking the GCC is Iran's only way to create enough cost to force the U.S. to stop. Iran cannot strike the U.S. mainland effectively, but the U.S. has placed dozens of high-value targets right on Iran's doorstep. By striking the GCC, Iran turns Washington's allies into pressure valves. If the chaos in the Gulf becomes unbearable, if airports close, oil stops, and populations panic, those very allies will be the ones begging the U.S. to cease hostilities. The three fatal vulnerabilities of the Gulf states. Despite spending hundreds of billions on Western weaponry, the GCC nations possess three structural Achilles heels that Iran exposed within 48 hours. Fixed bases versus mobile weapons ***. The U.S. bases, like Al Udeid in Qatar or the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, are static targets. Iran uses mosaic defense, small, decentralized units that launch drones and missiles from mobile launchers disguised as civilian trucks. Even if air defenses intercept the missiles, the drone swarms are harder to stop. Falling debris alone causes civilian casualties and psychological terror. Energy infrastructure ***. All GCC oil fields and refineries are located in flat, open deserts. They are sitting ducks for $50,000 drones. Within days, Saudi Aramco and Qatar energy facilities were hit, halting production in regions that have no place to hide. The water crisis ***. This is the most critical vulnerability. The GCC nations import 80% of their food and derive up to 60% of their fresh water from desalination plants. These plants are massive, coastal, and immobile. A single drone strike on a desalination plant creates a water crisis that no missile defense system can fix. The statistics provided by Professor Yang Xin are staggering. While Iran has a high water stress ratio, the GCC countries are in a different league. Saudi Arabia at 883%, Bahrain at 4,000%, and Dubai at a massive 17,000%. In a prolonged war of attrition, the GCC will die of thirst long before Iran runs out of ammunition. Iran hasn't fully weaponized this yet, but the mere threat creates a reverse deterrence. The GCC knows that if they escalate by joining the U.S. fight, Iran will stop hitting military bases and start hitting the water supply. Iran is a mountain fortress facing a flat desert. This geographical asymmetry is the silent factor that may dictate the endgame of 2026. The Alborz mountain range dominates Iran's northern landscape, with rugged terrain covering much of the nation's territory. This natural geography provides a formidable advantage, allowing Iran to conceal its missile batteries, drone swarms, mobile launchers, and strategic command centers deep within natural canyons and vast cave systems. It is, in essence, a national-scale version of the Tora Bora fortress used by the Taliban in Afghanistan. Iranian Foreign Minister Arke has revealed that their forces are currently employing what is known as mosaic defense. This decentralized tactic allows small, independent units to operate autonomously. They utilize mobile launchers disguised as civilian trucks to fire drones and short-range missiles before immediately relocating, a shoot-and-scoot strategy that is nearly impossible to track in real time. In stark contrast, the GCC nations sit upon flat, featureless desert. Their entire strategic backbone, military bases, oil fields, international airports, and vital desalination plants, lies completely exposed. These high-value targets are easily monitored by satellites, vulnerable to low-flying suicide drones, and offer virtually no natural terrain for concealment or protection. To put it simply, Iran fights from a mountain fortress, while the GCC stands exposed under an open sky. In the language of game theory, this represents an extreme defensive asymmetry. The attacker holds an overwhelming cost advantage over the defender. This explains why, despite the GCC spending hundreds of billions of dollars on high-tech American weaponry over several decades, they remain profoundly vulnerable the moment Iran decides to retaliate. The paradigm of conflict has shifted. Current U.S. and Israeli strategies now include the systematic destruction of Iran's water infrastructure, dams, reservoirs, and power stations to trigger a humanitarian crisis. The goal is to force Tehran to pivot inward to manage domestic collapse rather than fighting a foreign war. Conversely, Iran can weaponize this same logic against the GCC, targeting desalination plants to render these desert nations effectively uninhabitable. This will not be the swift, decisive conflict many expect. There will be no shock and awe victory if escalation continues. This leads us to the third critical element, asymmetric warfare. This is where the financial perspective becomes devastatingly clear. In a recent analysis of a potential U.S.-Iran war, Professor Chang proposed a sobering mathematical reality. An Iranian drone costs between $35,000 and $50,000. Iran is estimated to produce roughly 500 of these units per day, with a massive stockpile of 80,000 already in reserve. To intercept just one of these drones, American defense systems typically require 2 to 3 missiles, each costing approximately $1 million. The math is brutal. The U.S. must spend between $2 million and $3 million to destroy a $50,000 target. That is a cost-to-kill ratio of 40 to 1 or even 60 to 1 in favor of the attacker. This is the core of drone-age asymmetric warfare, and it completely subverts traditional military logic. Professor Chang argues that the U.S. military is currently designed for a Cold War era, a time when the primary goal was a massive display of power rather than grinding, low-cost combat. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction, MAD, was based on a simple principle: I have enough nuclear weapons to destroy you, so you won't attack first. However, this principle fails when the opponent is a nation willing to embrace martyrdom, utilizing mass-produced cheap drones while fighting from the safety of natural mountain fortresses. So, what do the primary actors actually want? The U.S. and Israel seek the total overthrow and balkanization of the Iranian regime. Donald Trump has made no effort to hide this intent. In an 8-minute video released in the early hours of the 28th, he stated clearly that the objective is to wipe out the current Iranian leadership. He issued a direct ultimatum to members of the IRGC: lay down your arms for full immunity or face certain death. Turning his attention to the Iranian public, he said, when we are finished, take back your government. Similarly, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu emphasized on Fox News that the Epic Fury campaign is designed to create the conditions for the Iranian people to reclaim their destiny and establish an elected government. This is the Layer 1 strategy, the narrative presented to the public. But the Layer 2 strategy, which Professor Chang analyzes in depth, is far more decisive and rarely discussed. It involves the exploitation of ethnic maps to dismantle Iran from within. On a standard map, Iran looks like a unified bloc, but it is actually one of the most ethnically complex nations on Earth. Persians make up only about 61% of the population. The remaining 40% consists of more than 10 distinct ethnic groups, each with its own language, culture, and history. Crucially, these minority groups live primarily along the country's borders. Think of Iran's ethnic map like an egg. The Persian yoke is in the center, while the outer ring along every border, is composed of minority groups. Many of these groups harbor long-standing grievances against the central government. Viewed through the eyes of a U.S. strategist, this is a golden opportunity. Every dissatisfied ethnic group is located on the periphery, making them easily accessible to outside influence and the covert supply of weaponry. Famed investigative journalist Seymour Hersh previously reported in The New Yorker that the Pentagon had established secret ties with various Iranian minority groups, encouraging sabotage efforts against the regime in the north and southeast. The CIA's World Factbook provides a detailed breakdown of these demographics, and in 2006, U.S. Marine Corps Intelligence commissioned 2 separate studies on the ethnic groups of Iraq and Iran. Professor Chang describes this long-term strategy as chillingly calculated. By funding separatist movements, the goal is to fracture Iran into warring ethnic enclaves that fight over dwindling resources, specifically water. When dams and reservoirs are destroyed, these groups will be forced to fight one another for what remains. This internal strife would consume Iran from the inside out, without requiring a single American boot on the ground. In the context of U.S. military history, this dark strategy is nothing new. For us in Vietnam, this logic is heartbreakingly familiar. The U.S. once sprayed millions of gallons of Agent Orange over Vietnam, not just to target soldiers, but to destroy the forests and crops. The goal was to force the population to relocate and cut off the food supply of the resistance. The consequences, the health impacts spanning generations, and the poisoned land persist to this day. The logic remains identical. destroy the infrastructure of survival, water, food, and arable land, to turn the civilian population into a weapon of pressure against an opposing government. Whether it is Agent Orange in Vietnam or destroying water dams in Iran, the methods change, but the underlying philosophy of war remains the same. The ultimate objective has not shifted in decades, maintaining the petrodollar system and controlling the aorta of global energy. As long as Middle Eastern oil is traded in U.S. dollars, the USD remains the world's reserve currency. This allows the U.S. to print money, accumulate debt, and fund military spending at levels no other nation can match. This cycle is the foundation of the American empire. Any regime in the Middle East that threatens this cycle must be removed. This isn't a conspiracy theory, it is the structural logic of global power. However, Iran is attempting to turn this catastrophe into a catalyst for a new world order. Tehran is not merely reacting, they are trying to use this war as a spark for a regional realignment. To understand this, we must look at the culture of martyrdom discussed earlier. Iran's logic is, if the regime is going to fall, it won't fall alone. They intend to create enough chaos to shatter the old order and pave the way for something new. Professor Chang refers to this hypothetical Iranian-led regional order as Pax Islamica. While it may sound far-fetched, look at what happened in just the first 72 hours of the conflict. Hezbollah opened a front in Lebanon. Immediately following reports of Khamenei's death, Hezbollah Secretary General Naim Qassem declared that they would fulfill their duty to confront aggression, vowing never to leave the field of resistance. Hezbollah fired 6 missiles at Israeli military bases in Haifa as retaliation. Israel responded with airstrikes on Beirut and ordered the evacuation of 50 villages in southern Lebanon, with the Israeli defense minister declaring Qassem a primary target. Iraqi Shia militias rose up. The Guardians of Blood brigades claimed responsibility for drone attacks on Victory Base near Baghdad International Airport. The Islamic Resistance in Iraq announced over 23 drone strikes on U.S. assets in Erbil. Kataib Hezbollah, the largest Shia militia in Iraq, warned that they would soon begin full-scale assaults on U.S. bases. In Yemen, the Houthis reactivated. Their leader, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, stated that his forces were on high alert and decided to resume missile and drone attacks on U.S. and Israeli vessels in the Red Sea. Meanwhile, Shia communities in Pakistan and Iraq reportedly stormed U.S. embassies, reflecting a global surge of anger. All of this occurred within a 48 to 72-hour window. These were not random acts. They are the realization of the axis of resistance that Iran has spent 40 years building, a proxy network stretching from Lebanon and Gaza to Iraq, Yemen, and Syria. Each link in this chain operates semi-independently with its own local goals, but they share a common enemy and a single spiritual leader. When Khamenei was killed, the entire network switched to combat mode. This is the moment of truth for the axis of resistance, a test of whether these proxies will truly fight when the call is made. The long-term Pax Islamica strategy aims to topple U.S.-backed regimes across the Islamic world and build a new regional order led by Tehran. It is a high-risk gamble that may fail, but it explains why Iran is willing to accept devastating short-term losses for a much longer game than the 4 to 5 week war Trump envisions. Professor Chang predicts that of all the GCC nations, Bahrain will be the first domino to fall. The reason is structural and demographic. Over 50% of Bahrain's population is Shia, yet they are ruled by the Sunni Al Khalifa royal family. Furthermore, Bahrain hosts the headquarters of the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet, which controls maritime operations across the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, and the Arabian Sea. This means a majority of the population shares a religious bond with Iran, but is ruled by a pro-U.S. minority on the very land that houses America's largest regional military hub. Bahrain has already come under direct fire. Ballistic missiles have targeted the Fifth Fleet, and sirens have wailed across the capital. As the Shia community in Bahrain watches their global spiritual leader be killed and finds their country dragged into war because of a foreign military base, an uprising becomes a simple inevitability. History provides a precedent. During the 2011 Arab Spring, a Shia-led protest nearly toppled the Bahraini monarchy. They were only saved when Saudi Arabia sent tanks across the King Fahd Causeway to suppress the movement. But this time, Saudi Arabia is preoccupied with defending itself from Iranian drones. Who will save Bahrain now? If Bahrain falls, the message to every Shia community ruled by a Sunni minority in the Gulf is clear: your time has come. This is the essence of Pax Islamica, not a traditional invasion, but the creation of enough chaos for pro-US regimes to collapse from within. By May 5, 2026, the financial impact was already stark. Brent crude was trading around $79 a barrel, a sharp rise from its pre-war level of $61. The projections are grim. If the conflict lasts 3 to 5 weeks and the Strait of Hormuz reopens quickly, prices might stabilize between $80 and $90. However, JP Morgan warns that if the blockade lasts longer than 3 weeks, prices could hit $120. In an extreme scenario, a total blockade using naval mines and missiles, DBK estimates Brent crude could soar toward $200. Natural gas prices in Europe would jump by more than 20%. Asia, which receives 70% of the oil flowing through Hormuz, would be the most directly impacted region. While financial markets are volatile, they haven't collapsed yet. The US dollar is strengthening, and the 10-year Treasury yield rose to 4.3%, reflecting fears of rising inflation and a delay in Fed rate cuts. The winners will be the energy, defense, and cybersecurity sectors, while aviation and tourism, especially Middle Eastern carriers, will face extreme pressure. If the GCC nations destabilize, the petrodollar system will tremble. These nations sell oil in USD and reinvest those dollars into US treasuries and tech stocks. Their sovereign wealth funds are massive players in the American market. If they are attacked and lose stability, that capital flow stops or reverses, putting immense pressure on both the S&P 500 and the value of the dollar itself. Could this lead to World War III? For now, the answer is no. But this is the closest the world has come since the Cold War. A true world war requires the direct involvement of multiple superpowers on multiple fronts. Currently, it is the US and Israel versus Iran and its proxies. Russia, China, and Europe have not entered the fray directly. However, several factors make this conflict qualitatively different from previous regional wars. 1. It directly threatens 20% of the global energy supply. It involves the GCC states, which are pillars of the global financial system. It has the potential to trigger secondary fronts in Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, and possibly Pakistan. It is happening concurrently with the war in Ukraine, stretching Western resources to their limit. Trump says the war will last 4 to 5 weeks, but history shows that Middle Eastern conflicts rarely follow the script. The 2003 invasion of Iraq was supposed to be swift. It lasted nearly a decade. We in Southeast Asia are not outside the blast radius. Vietnam imports crude oil, and global price hikes directly fuel domestic inflation, transport costs, and gas prices. If the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, the inflationary pressure will reach economies thousands of miles away. Global financial markets, which dictate the flow of foreign capital into the Vietnamese stock market, will be shaken. More importantly, understanding this conflict allows us to read the global chessboard. We are seeing how the decisions of a few leaders can alter trade routes, asset values, and the geopolitical order for decades to come. The game is still being played, and whether we like it or not, we are all pieces on that board.